Yeah, I'm very happy, Matt, that you took the time and that you, sitting here with me. I think we have a huge time difference. It took us a while to find a schedule that fits both of us, especially as you guys are being all over the place. So, hi, Matt.
Hi, yeah, no, I appreciate you having me. I'm very excited.
I remember the first time I saw you guys. It was done in a very mysterious way. I was on Twitter, and you were talking about um, starting a new startup, and I was seeing different kind of cut models, and I was thinking, what is that? And then the name, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this, is not as explicit as some other robotic company names. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you guys doing.
Yeah, so I guess as a preface, my name is Matt Freed. I'm the hardware lead for a company called Kscale Labs, where we are kind of on a mission to build open source humanoids with the main goal to see basically a billion humanoids out in the wild. The name Kscale Labs, originally actually we weren't named Kscale Labs. We were named Don't Panic, Stay Human. And this was one of our our CEO, Ben. It was the original company name. And but we ended up changing it because we wanted to reflect more about what the whole mission of the company was. And so K scale stands for the Kardashev scale. And so this way to kind of understand our levels of civilization and how to progress. And our goal is to basically progress humanity positively. And so we kind of took that name of K from Kardashev and converted it into our company. So we kind of always remember the direction that we should be heading. And we see like this is the point of building humanoids is we see humanoids as this way for humanity to be able to continue up these levels and continue up these scales. But I mean, yeah.
I mean, putting this in or having in your source, in your roots, the open source idea is something that, especially this year, where we see so many companies, commercialized companies, doing humanoids, especially for manufacturing, automation, automotive. Or household, this is the one of the biggest markets, right? It's interesting to see a company doing a different approach and saying, why should this limit it to companies, right? And here I would like to better understand where this idea comes from, and yeah, maybe while we are at this journey, you can tell us a little bit about Matt and your own journey. That would be awesome.
Yeah. So I guess I'll quickly start with myself and then we can get really into the company.
Thanks.
Because it's all very interesting. It's all happened very quickly. So like my background is I am the hardware lead. So I have a mechanical engineering degree from Worcester Polytechnic Institute, small engineering school out in Massachusetts. I actually, and I every single summer I'd worked over at Lockheed Martin on helicopters. So
Hmm.
CADing and yes, and I was involved on the autonomous helicopter program. So I was doing a lot of the mechanical controls and the hydraulics for them. I actually ended up leaving kind of the mechanical engineering world to go and pursue computer science because I got really interested in autonomous driving. So
Hmm.
seeing, these helicopters drive themselves, I was like, oh, I really want to do that. And it didn't seem too hard, honestly, at the time. In reality, autonomous helicopters, pretty difficult. I think it's mainly just the safety aspect of things. But ended up actually going over to Cornell Tech to get a computer science degree
Hmm.
and and focusing really heavily on sort of deep learning and autonomous driving. And I, out of that, I actually ended up building a company that was doing speech models for manufacturing sites. So I ran that for the past kind of 3-ish, 4 years, where we were kind of very early on in terms of language models. So this was before large language models became a thing, where we were deploying like radio networks that could autonomously allow people to basically send like voice notes back and forth and then have that as a data collection technique so that you can have like an organized understanding of what's actually happening on the manufacturing floor. That was great. I mean, we were partnered with Stanley Black and Decker, went through a couple accelerator programs, but September of last year kind of became I was just like, I want to start pursuing other projects. And I actually didn't think that I was going to get into robotics at all. Uh, I had been pretty big in robotics growing up. I actually, well, I guess I think like a lot of people, most people now kind of start robotics in high school in a way. I actually consider myself kind of late. I started robotics my senior year of high school. I remember that my junior year, I really wanted to do robotics, and I was the captain of my wrestling team. And so I went to my coach and I said, "Hey, I'm going to be late to practice every Monday for 30 minutes, like 30 minutes late, because I'm joining the robotics team." And he came back and he said, "No, you're not doing that.
Mm.
You're the captain." So my junior year didn't do robotics. Right when my season ended, I remember just telling my coach saying, "Hey, I'm leaving the team. I'm doing the robotics team. I don't care." Now our
Ooh.
robotics team, our robotics team was not good. I actually don't even, unfortunately, I don't even remember the name. It was a very small robot, and we weren't good at all. Um, but I fell in love with it, and throughout undergrad, I did a bunch of robotics courses. We had a robotics major, and I almost transitioned over to it, but I stuck with mechanical because for some reason I just really, really liked the physical world. And it was always, I feel like this is also like everybody's dream, which is like my favorite movie growing up for me was Iron Man. Like I wanted to build giant mechs. Like inherent, like you can't, it's tough in a world to be like, oh, like it's so hard to make this stuff make sense in like a business perspective. And so I think a lot of people end up kind of dropping that dream. But I would say like back and this is kind of the thing where hardware is very hard to make a business, right? I think the supply chains are always difficult. We're always dealing with these political issues. Um, Nowhere is perfect to make everything. And so back in December, ended up meeting Ben. So Ben and I actually met very late. And I was working on a couple of side projects in like the language model space, but it was this hybrid of language models and hardware. And Ben had just kind of formed the company. So yeah, and I remember like meeting him being like, "Oh yeah, I actually started a humanoid company yesterday." And I was like, "That's cool. That's awesome. That's
And where
great."
did you guys meet, if you don't mind me asking?
We met in New York. So him and I have some mutual friends, and those mutual friends often put on these sort of like AI events in New York.
Hmm.
The AI community in New York has grown, but for a while it was pretty small. To the point of it was like there was like 10 of us on Saturdays that were just like building like companies and just like we would just get together and we would like work on our companies. So it was like a very, very small community, which was really nice. And but I had met Ben and Ben was like, "Hey, I have this workshop up in the Bronx." And me being like a hardware engineer, even though I had kind of left the hardware world for the past 3 years because I was doing AI, I was like, "Oh my God, like that's my dream. I want to own a workshop in New York." So I was like, "Can I come over?" And he was like, "Yeah, of course you can come over." So the next day, went over. He showed me his kind of initial robot designs. I critiqued it a good amount as engineers do, and I kind of thought that was it. I really thought that was it. Because then I left and I was like, all right, like that was cool, awesome place. I'll see you around. And then about a week later, I grew up in Connecticut, so I was home for the holidays for Christmas. And I remember getting a text from Ben saying, hey, uh, I just got into Y Combinator. He applied very late. Um, do you think that you can build a humanoid robot? Do you want to drop everything and move out to California?
That is awesome.
And well, I mean, and I probably said the same rational thing, which was the question was, can you build a humanoid robot in 3 months? I was like, that sounds pretty hard. Probably not. And then do you want to move out to Cali and drop everything? Oh, did I freeze?
Not sure. I mean, yes, you do.
Yes, it looks like I'm frozen. Hold
Yeah,
on.
wait.
It looks like I'm gonna have to reconnect. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right, let's try this again. Let me make sure. Perfect. Sorry about that. I think whenever Zoom does the emoji reactions, it like freezes my computer. But anyway, so I kind of gave him this kind of, I would say, rational response, which was, honestly, building a humanoid company isn't that great of an idea. It's very hard, and typical hardware startups are doing this business model, which is, you just build humanoid and then you sell humanoid and then you get revenue, right? Tried and true. Lots of robotics companies have done it in the past, but it's it's a lot. There's a lot more that goes into it, and like the reality is that that's a very hard business to make,
Just a
especially if
second
it's
question,
yeah.
because you said that a lot of companies are doing or did that, right? I mean, until today, the I don't know too many companies that actually finished a humanoid robot and we're shipping a humanoid. We have Pollen, I know, and I think I just read the number. I think it's 80K or something. So they sold a few, as far as I remember, and I remember that Unitree just said that the 16K one is sold out. So, but there's not too many ones you can actually buy and actually use, right? So,
Yeah, I think let me backtrack. I mean, not so much humanoids, but robots in general.
yeah.
So we could think of like iRobot, right? Like what's iRobot doing? iRobot's considered successful. Are they really the best company? It's only so much. But it was this kind of thing where I was like, hey, it's kind of crazy. Let me just train in and let me give you my thoughts. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not gonna go out to California.
Mm.
Like, I actually had a offer from big tech, and after having built a company for 3 years and not made a just good amount of money and living in New York, I was a pretty broke man. And so I was like, I'm gonna take this big tech job and maybe enjoy life a little bit.
Hmm.
So I trained in about 2 hours to go meet Ben, and we just had this conversation, which was just about how building a company that makes, money through just hardware isn't like a good company, and that there should be other types of business models that exist for us to actually capitalize on for humanoids. And you could think of like Tesla, right? Where Tesla, like you buy the car and they make money off that purchase, but when FSD comes out, right, that's a software program. Like they can scale that incredibly. And like that's really, I think, how you can make really good robotics companies is this realization that hardware is hard, but it doesn't have to be the way in which you make money.
Mm.
There are many other avenues. There are many, many hard things about robotics that it doesn't just have to be the physical thing that you make money on. Robotics is like one of the hardest, I think, one of the hardest things in the world. It's the combination of electrical, mechanical, and computer science, and it's the real world, right? There's so many unsolved problems. There's going to be so many different business models that come out of it, and we're still incredibly early. And this is actually how we kind of position the company as well, which is uh, we have a bunch of different avenues. We're a small startup, we're agile. We think that there is a lot to be discovered. And so we don't necessarily just need to pin ourselves and saying, we're going to build humanoid, we're going to make money on humanoid. Uh, there's all these little things that even layers and layers and layers down, you could talk about like the actuator firmware, you could talk about the operating system. There's all these different layers that are such big struggles that people need solved. Sorry, I went on a little rant there. I feel like I'm
No,
missing one part of the question.
no. I think it's interesting to see because I had a talk just after I saw your first initial, let's say, because when you spoke to Benjamin last year, end of last year, early this year, this is further away from the first time I saw you guys on Twitter. So there's a few months in between, right, where things have happened. And I remember when I saw you guys, and I immediately reached out to Trent and then Rob. So this is Trent Shumay and Rob Knight. I think I
Mhm.
mentioned them in every single episode. I'm a huge fan of these guys, and so they work on a hand Dex hand. So and this is an open
Great looking hand,
source,
by the way.
yeah.
Yes, incredible hand.
And I had separate episodes with them and an episode together with them, and so I'm in very regular contact with these guys, and they're very helpful regarding the technical aspects of it because I'm more in a commercial side when it comes to robotics versus the technical aspects of it. So at neurorobotics where I am, or neurorobotics, so I'm within the growth department, right? So I'm responsible for growing the company. So there's human resources, there's marketing, there's sales, there's very close connection with engineering, right? And I'm very helpful that these guys are always answering my questions when I have, because they're too technical or too abstract for me to answer. And and when I see interesting things, funny things, or things that excite me, I share them with them as well. So and I was saying, look at these guys. They are not building only hand open source. They would like to build a humanoid open source. So what do you think of that? And it was a heated discussion because they said, okay, why reinventing the wheel? And I had a call with Benjamin, your co-founder, as
Mhm.
well about this. And one of the things that he was mentioning and you were mentioning as well is there's so many unsolved problems, right? And you're not building entirely on your own. You're always building on top of existing things, right? And then combining existing things. But you still have the feeling that there is a gap between all those projects that are out there, even the pollen one, that are not entirely solved. And so you do think that there is, as you said, different markets, different use cases, different applications, different layers. So there's enough space. Why not doing things on your own, and not necessarily only because of ego? I would like to be the first company, right? There's so many first companies out there. Not because there's the curiosity that sparks you. And we were very interested in how you guys would monetize that. So thanks for sharing everything you would like to share about these things. So this is the reason why I'm very curious about your
Yeah.
project.
Yeah, and we're very open about everything. As kind of open source is, right? You could see right now, actually, we're basically open source everything. You could see our software, you could see our hardware. It's available in CAD. We're making build instructions so everybody can make it. We see, and we could talk in more as to why specifically open source and why open source is the direction that companies today should go. But I think to start out, it's um, there's a humanoids is an unsolved problem. Like if it was a solved problem, we would have humanoids in our houses and they would be doing everything for us. And so until we really get to that day, it's an unsolved problem. And what we're starting to see is a convergence in kind of humanoid form factors. So like, years ago there were all these different shapes, and now when somebody releases a humanoid, it's like one of five designs. We actually looked, I mean, when we started the just like making our initial humanoid, like we took a lot of inspiration from specifically like the Fourier robot. We saw how they did their linkages and how they did their leg setup, and we were like, that's a great robot. Let's do that. We could do that. Um, so we did that, and then we ran into some issues where Isaac Sim wasn't letting us simulate linkages. And
Mm.
so we had to make some differences. We were like, okay, let's change over from a linkage system to a belt drive system. And so like our robot kind of changed a little bit. And we were like, oh, like that's actually a good change because now we can do our simulations in Isaac Sim. And that's it. We're expecting Isaac Sim to be one of the best simulators. This is going to be great. We want this ease of development. And then we saw, Boston Dynamics and now the Unitree G1 like come out, and they have a completely different hip design than the other humanoids, right? They have this like 360, and the benefit there is that they can actually stand up. And so we were like, oh man, like this is a great idea. Like let's change it so that our robot can also do this. And it's this convergence. And so now we're going to see, because people are building things, they're trying new things. Uh, we're now kind of getting to that optimal path. I mean, I think that the optimal path, I think we're still going to have like hundreds of different designs, but people need to be trying different things in order for us to actually start getting to the like end destination that we want to get to. Because if we just kept building, if one person built an open source humanoid and we just stuck with that design, that's just an acceptance that humanoids is solved. And I think that's just not true. Unfortunately, then That's like a very boring thing then, and I probably wouldn't have gotten involved in the project.
Mm.
I mean, it's such a vast and open area. Um, but it's kind of going into why open source is incredibly important. Open source is incredibly important now because, and especially in robotics and in the humanoid space, for two reasons. Actually, maybe it's just one reason, which is that people need to know where we as like a civilization are in terms of progress on humanoids. I think that there's so many uh, researchers and companies that post these fantastic demos, absolutely fantastic demos of humanoids doing great things. And then the world then thinks that we're at that stage when the reality is that the demo one was might have been teleoped a lot of the time. So they aren't completely honest there. Or two, it's a demo that they got right after 1,000 tries, right? And it's like, what
It's a
good?
demo. Yeah.
It's a demo. And unfortunately, like I would say that people that aren't in the space don't understand that. And so it really hurts the entire robotics community because then if you were to make progress that's like not at that demo scale, but still like better progress to actually get consistent, like useful humanoids, it wouldn't be viewed as progress. And people expect now, we've watched Star Wars, and so we all want Star Wars. And people think we're at Star Wars. And unfortunately, the reality is that we're not. And so now you'll see these companies that like will go under because they posted the demo and then they never got anywhere beyond the demo. Or it's just like people get really frustrated, right? You could think autonomous cars, where we had the autonomous car wave, where there was all these companies and they were all promising the world, and that like flooded the investment. And then all of a sudden, all these companies failed because they were kind of over promising and under delivering. And so then the investment dried up. And where do we at now? Like we have two companies like Tesla and Waymo,
Mm.
which is unfortunate, right? We are quite worried that a lot of these closed companies are just posting these demos and they're just going to flop. And like people deserve to know where we're at. And this is the whole reason to be open source, is to be quite honest, saying this is where we're at. You can see our progress every single day. We have our daily stand up. Actually, our daily stand up is public. Every single day we have our daily stand up. And we just want to make sure that there's honesty in the community to say, this is where we're at. This is what the researchers say that they can do, but this is the reality of what we're able to do. And eventually, I think that that's how we get to useful humanoids. This is how we
Mm.
avoid this issue of a bunch of companies promising the world and then just blowing up. We just need consistency.
True, to a certain degree, because you need, I mean, why is it like that, right? So this is the hen and egg problem. For example, why are the majority of news that you see in the television, and please don't let's go into this conspiracy corner. It's people the reaction of people towards bad news or news that are flashy is much higher regarding how much time they spend, how much they think and talk about it versus good news, right? So when you're in a relationship and you meet friends and you never talk, I spent so many good days with my friend, girl, or my boyfriend. So it's about the drama. Drama sells, right? And so this is why there's so much drama, because it sells so good, right? And now coming back to funding or VC funding or VC funded companies. So why is it that demos need to be flashy? Why is it that these kind of speaking and storytelling is so much further ahead versus the actually engineering? It's because it works, right? And because these things are very expensive. I mean, I think you, Benjamin, was so kind to tell me you guys are like 5 people, I guess.
Four.
4. Mm.
Yeah.
And so you got a little bit of money, and then everyone needs to live somewhere. Everyone needs to eat, and I mean, you guys are very young, and I do know that you have a house, right? And you can see this in the news that you're sharing there regularly. It's this house where you guys are sitting together and brainstorming and working, but it's expensive. Even if everyone is sitting in the same house, right? You guys are in the Bay Area, so it's the rents over there is, or not the Bay Area. I'm not too familiar with
It is
the
the best. Yeah.
exactly names of the neighborhood, but it's expensive over there, right? It's not like Berlin used to be, where you can rent a flat for 500 or 600 euro per month. And so you do need money for the rent, you do need money for the equipment, you do need money to say to feed the people. And as you said, hardware is hard, right? You guys using 3D printers, but Brad Addock is from Figure is very open about. You were mentioning this before, the supply chain from Humanoid, right? There's a lot of things that they are not existing, right? You can buy a CNC machine, but there's a lot of things you need to build on your own. And as a humanoid is so complex, you need so many things that you need to either produce here on your own, or you need to buy them. So it's not an so you do need to have volume to get the prices down, so it becomes affordable, and then you can make a business model out of it. So I think coming back to the storytelling part and the where we are actually on the engineering level, and what is marketing and sales selling, right? So this gap, I think, as I'm working in a startup and was working in a startup before that, I do know this very much. To close this gap within the company is a big headache, and every company that is able to close that gap has a much higher chance to succeed, right? And I do love your approach of being very open about it. And I think the open source, if you have a community that supports you, because my former guest in the last episode was telling me that he's sharing very publicly what he is doing, right? I don't know if you've seen it, but
This is
he
Lincoln.
says, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. We meet every week.
yeah.
We
So
hop
so
on
he
call, we
said,
talk.
so he says someone is writing me, dude. I think you should try this and that. I tried this and that, and it worked much better for me versus that one, right? So you have this whole community that is working on problems, right? So it's a very interesting approach. I'm a huge fan of that, and but I'm much more interested in seeing in the future how you guys will be able to monetize that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah. So going back, I think that there's like a scale, right, as to promising the moon versus being honest, right? And as you said, during raise time is a very different time period of like what you're putting out, right? You're building this hype cycle. Um, but it's there is differences in terms of like what you want investors to see, right? To see potential, and what you're just kind of putting out to the general public and trying to convince them that you're a real company. It's a little different. But in terms of like the open source stuff as well, I mean, yeah, it's the community feedback is great. It's literally thousands and thousands of eyes that are just looking at your designs and critiquing you, but in a very good way, right? I think a lot of people are afraid to put their designs out there because they're like, oh, it's not perfect. I could do
Mm,
better. And
mm.
it's the honest, and we all start there. Each one of us always starts there. Like just being able to put your design out, uh, you will get the feedback that you need. I remember like I'm good with mechanical engineering, and oh no, no. Oh, give me a second.
Interesting.
Oh man. Okay. I talk with my hands, and which is a very bad thing because Zoom is gonna
Why?
keep. Why do I talk with my
No,
hands?
no, no, no. I mean,
Oh,
it's not bad in general. It's just bad for your Zoom. But it
yeah.
doesn't matter. I mean, I cut it out. It doesn't matter. No, don't worry about it.
Great. We're back. I leave it in. It's always fun to show the mess ups.
True, true. Even better.
Um,
Even less work for me. Thanks.
exactly. Of course. What I was saying is like I'm good with mechanical engineering, and I would say I'm pretty good with artificial intelligence and programming, but I'm very bad with electrical engineering. I
Mm,
And so I started making some PCB boards. And I remember like posting them online saying, here's my PCB board. And I got a lot of feedback saying, hey, you know, looks okay, but you're completely missing ground. And I was
mm,
like, yeah, yeah, I am an idiot, but I
yeah.
fixed it, right? You get to fix it. And like, at least now learned that, don't do that.
Mm,
So we'll see, and this is going to be very interesting, right? Because I see this in the future where we have all these AI companions coming out, right? You have things like Flux is implementing, if you're familiar with Flux at
mhm.
all. for anybody that's not, they're kind of like PCB layout software that like they're integrating AI into it. And like eventually like you'll have artificial intelligence to look at all your designs and to critique you and to help you. And same with mechanical, right? And we'll have these sort of eyes at all time to give us feedback. But I mean, at the same time, one is that right now you can just use the community to do that because they're fantastic and they know a lot more than I do, for sure. There's no way anybody knows everything. And so kind of outsourcing that and having everybody give you feedback is fantastic. Uh, it's also really cool because it's just we get so many different layers of opinions. Where I had put out, I put out a tweet, um, which was like, "Hey, send me your favorite robot heads." Right? Everybody has a different opinion as to like what they like, and there's this deeper kind of level of why they like it. And I'm very big into automotive, and so like I always have this internal debate of do I like soft round edges or do I like these hard sharp edges? And you can kind of like see like there's these like two divides of people that like these really sharp edged looking robots, and then also the ones that want like the soft round cuddly ones. And
Mhm.
like that gives me in my head, I'm like, okay, cool. I can actually design both and I can appeal other than just working in the dark and doing my own preferences in a way. Like I think like sometimes I think I know best. That's not true at all. That's not true at
Well,
all.
and I mean the benefit of that, and I'm speaking just yeah, I'm speaking to a lot of tech founder. When you're building something, in the very end, you do need to give it to a client, you give it to a customer, you do need to sell it. So what you think might be the
A
most
lot of
genius
engineers
idea
forget
ever.
that. Engineers forget that.
Yeah, and I like to close that bridge. I think I mentioned this a few times in the podcast already, but in my former the former company I was working with, Micropsy Industries, so it's an AI guided robotic software that we are using. And in the office right next to me was sitting a good friend of mine, an engineer. So we had always discussions going on about how to approach things, right? And as I'm more pragmatic towards customer focused or solution focused, right? I don't care about, or the customer doesn't care about the backend. The customer doesn't care about how much work it is for an engineer or why it's working or why it's not working. They just care about their own problems and the usability, and keeping those things in mind, and that that they matter more than the engineer and its work. And this, for some people, seems to be very like personal attacked, right? Because this is my work and you're criticizing my work. So, and but to understand that you're not the one who's buying that, right? Just the other day, I had a discussion about the iPhone. So I'm a first time iPhone user this year. A good friend of mine gave it to me, and there's a lot of things I don't
Welcome.
understand. Thanks. There's a lot of things I don't understand, and it doesn't make sense for me because I was using an Android for 10 years. So I'm getting in a discussion with him and asking about this and that, and he says, "Yeah, because it's designed. There's a specific purpose behind it." I said, "I don't care. It is not doing what I want them to do." And he says, "Yeah, then you need to get an Android." I said, "So so this kind of discussion are necessary. And if you're so brave and so open and so long-term thinking about these things while you're putting them out there, you get feedback much faster. You are working on the things that make sense from a commercial perspective as well, but from a technical perspective as well, because as you said, you only have your own experience, right? And with
Right.
the putting it out there, you have the experience of hundreds and thousands of people that are much older than you are, that much more experienced than you are, and that have seen much more different kind of use cases that you have, right? So there's a reason why I love this open source approach.
Yeah, and I think that there's a fine balance. I think specifically in tech, like you should definitely understand the technology. There's this kind of balance between being heads down engineering and heads up solutions, right? You should be very well versed in both. I think a lot of people, a lot of engineers skew towards being more heads down, right? It's what we know.
Mm.
It's the easiest thing, it's the most comfortable thing, and that a lot of engineers
Comfortable.
would
Mm.
get a lot of value of, putting their heads up every once in a while.
Mm.
Um, but I do think that like in terms of humanoids, I think specifically you do need leaders who are or who have been very heads down and in the weeds to begin with, because this is a very unsolved technical challenge. And there's a lot of limitations that you wouldn't know if you weren't well versed in the scene, really. I just have this in general with technology companies where I think like engineers aren't always the best leaders, right? I mean, oftentimes we spend way too much time heads down. Um, but there are fantastic engineers who are fantastic leaders. And when we have technology companies that aren't ran by these leaders, we end up with companies like Boeing. So let's not let's avoid building companies now like Boeing.
I think if you're going public, then you have more shareholders. Not, I mean, shareholders obviously, but more stakeholder, right? So you have more opinions that needed to be taken care of. And I think
Public company is hard. That is a hard job. Incredibly hard. Yes, I agree.
hmm. So I think here lays one of the biggest problems, right? You have you're not keeping the end user in mind anymore, right? If you do have a strong leadership, then you're keeping the end customer in mind, and then you are able to transport a vision, and maybe you're even able to transport this to your shareholders so they share their vision, and then they are sticking and doing decisions or sticking with decisions that might be not in the best interest commercial wise. But I don't think we have too many of these companies anymore. I do believe, or I would like to believe, that the company
Mhm.
I'm working for is one of those companies. I just had a discussion with our CEO. So this is David from David Reger from Neuro Robotics. So we have a big industry in Germany, right? Especially automotive industry. But a lot of the innovation that came out in the last few years is not driven anymore by these companies, but by other companies. So I don't have a car. I come from Berlin, so it's a big metropolitan city. We have pretty well working public transport system, so there's no need for me to having a car, right? But every now and then when I get a car or in a car of a friend, the first thing they do is they take out their mobile phone and they connect the car with a mobile phone. And so you have these companies that are building cars for 100 years, right? So they're among they're among the biggest car companies in the world. But you're entering the car, and then and now you have another tech company who's running the OS on the car, right? And for all the things that you do in the car, and how can that happen? This can happen because you're too afraid to do innovation. You are too afraid or you're making decision because you think you're making the decision in the best interest of the shareholder, keeping the most money, not spending too much money on things where you're unsure if you can draw more money out of it. And yeah, I think this is one of the things that you can lose the game.
Yeah, and I think that so I kind of have a lot of analogies here too, where this is also the premise of our company as well, which is there's a lot of fantastic companies that know how to build their product. So the car companies know how to build a good car, which is great, right? As you mentioned, but car companies aren't necessarily good at building good software. Very different industry. Um, And so this is why I see like, Apple and Google, they come in. I can kind of give a couple of analogies here where when I was working on my past company, I worked very hand in hand with Stanley Black and Decker and Stanley Black and Decker, large manufacturing company. They were building their own ERP system or the MES system. And they had just brought in like massive amounts of software talent. They had just had their first CTO. They had a chief AI officer. They had someone handling all the data. They brought all these people together and they were trying to build the software. And you would imagine that a company that is their own customer would build the best product. And the reality was that just Stanley didn't know how to run a software company. They didn't actually know how to build good software. And so what happened was they ended up, honestly, whenever I would talk to these plants about the software, they would be like, no, we don't want to use it. They just brought in an external software. I think they were bringing in Tulip. I think they're probably still bringing in Tulip, and it just works great because they're a fantastic software company. And we saw this kind of happen uh, with smart TVs as well, where we found that in the beginning, when smart TVs were coming out, every single TV company was building their own software. And honestly, the smart TVs were the worst experience I had ever had. Like they were clunky and they just didn't work. And the software updates were just ridiculous. And apps just didn't load. And what they found out was that, hey, like Stanley Black & Decker is just really good at manufacturing things. And these smart TV companies, LG, Samsung, I think Samsung might still build their own, I forget. They're just really good at building hardware television, and they're just not good at the software. And so they bring in people like Amazon and Google, who are great software companies. And then they build the software and things just work perfectly. And this is what we're kind of envisioning the future of humanoids is also going to be like, where there's a ton of fantastic consumer electronic companies that can build things at scale because they already have the supply chain set and they have the engineers, they have the experience. Like vacuum companies are going to do great. They have, they already have incredible electric actuators. They have that experience. They have that manufacturing setup. They can build the embodiments for artificial intelligence so well, so cheaply at such massive scales. They're just not good at the software. And the software is so ridiculously hard for humanoids. We don't have an internet scale data set. Nobody really knows the data that we should be collecting. It's still kind of in the research development stages. And this is the whole premise of the company where we kind of say as well is that we are not necessarily a hardware company. We don't plan to sell the humanoid. Um, we are building the humanoid because the humanoids don't exist today, and we need a platform to be able to develop on. And in order to build software, because we're really great software engineers. I mean, Ben comes over from Tesla Autopilot and Optimus team, and our other co-founder Pavel, like basically the chat GPT of like Europe. Um, we're fantastic at this, but it's like we're trying to build for a platform that doesn't quite exist yet.
Mm.
But this expectation is that there's so many companies out there that are just ready. Once they have the designs ready, once the software, once they can like, once a useful humanoid is capable, um, they should be more than ready to just start production. Like that's our expectation is that there's going to be a slow ramp up, right? Once we get useful humanoids, a nice large boom.
And do you think that you guys, because you're such a small team, right, and you're still in the very early stages of the company's life, I do know that you guys I think you mentioned this early on, that you are in some accelerator programs, and I think you got some money from Y Combinator, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you do have the connection because there is a lot of things that you don't know and that you don't have so much experience with, right? So that are still somehow connected to the humanoid. And I would be
Right.
interested in, I mean, as I'm in the growth department, the company changes every 6 months, right? 12 months, depends on which stage you are. So and can you see what will be in the do you have an idea what will be upcoming in the, I don't know, let's say 6 months, 12 months? Do you already are able to speak a little bit about that? Give a little sneak peek?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, we are really aiming to have the whole build ready for people to basically 3D print and manufacture within the next 6 months. So, really, right now is that we have what we are right now like assuming is our V1 public release for our humanoid. And this humanoid is fully 3D printed, everything except the electronics.
Mm.
We are waiting on some of the PCBs to get in that manage the electronics very well, but we really would just want to be able to offer people a kit. So basically, send you a kit, you can assemble it yourself. You'll then basically flash the kit with our software, and you should have a working humanoid. Now, what is working, right? The expectation is that it can walk, talk, and manipulate. Won't be great, but this is kind of the AI approach of things, which is your AI will never be good until it can actually have enough data to be good.
Mm.
And so it'll start off bad, but as it does tasks, as you kind of command it throughout the house, it begins to learn. And every humanoid that gets deployed is this influx of new data that we can continue to train and get to usefulness.
So you
So,
guys will be, sorry, so you guys will be, so there will be an option of the data that will be collected throughout the kits that has been printed and assembled back to your platform, so to speak.
right, yes, we hope that the community is willing to kind of share this data with us,
Hmm.
because it's more of like this, I'll call it like humanoid project, where if we can all kind of work together to collect this humanoid data at scale, we can start building an actual useful humanoid data set, especially on like one embodiment, right? I think that there's still a lot of unproven. First off, there's a lot of just unknowns in terms of what data you should be collecting. But the other one is there's a lot of unknowns as to whether uh, data from one embodiment, let's say like an arm, just like a
Mm.
single arm, transfers over to a two-arm system or a four-arm system. I think that we're still kind of, I think a lot of companies are still trying to manage that and figure that out. And I know there's a couple companies trying to solve that, right? We have Pi, which is saying that they're capable or they're working on the capability to be able to transfer data between embodiments, like one foundation model for all robots, which is a massive task. But if it's doable, that would be awesome. That would be so cool.
And can you tell us a little bit about the specs? So how big will it be? How heavy will it be? What kind of task will it be able to do?
Yeah.
If the AI would be developed enough,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah. So right now what we're looking at is without a head, it's about 4'5". I would say with a head, we're probably looking at about 4'8" to 5 feet. So like a small kind of human in a way, um, which is great. So it's tall enough that it can reach your counter and everything, but it's not too tall where, if it falls, it's gonna hurt you. The
Hmm.
weight is around, I would say, 60-ish pounds, 25 to 30 kilos. Depends how many actuators we end up putting or deciding to put elsewhere.
Hmm.
The whole robot is very modular. So we are able to kind of swap out different arms, different legs. So if you want like a 7 DOF arm, right, it's going to weigh different than a 5 DOF arm.
Hmm.
And like the as you mentioned, like the Dex hand, like that's great. Like I would love to actually try and get one of the Dex hands on the robot. Because right now you'll see that we have like a two-finger gripper that was influenced from the UMI team.
Hmm.
But I mean, we don't really know what the right gripper is, and we assume that in the future, right, 5 fingers or 4 fingers or 3 fingers, there's going to be some sort of convergence again, right? We see Unitree has a 3 finger one, which works very well. And so we'll probably, continually make new sorts of attachments in this way and try these out. As in terms of tasks, I think it's kind of it's a very interesting approach or interesting question because when we talk about AGI, it's like AGI is very general. Like when ChatGPT released, well, what was the tasks that people said it could do? And maybe you could assume that it was like the task was just to talk with you, but it's very general, right? Like we found out that it was really good at coding and we found out that it was, really good at proofreading. And that's kind of the similar approach that we're taking, where we actually don't necessarily want to define the tasks that it can do, being like, oh, it does this, this, and this. Um, we need people to try to make it to do different tasks. And if it's bad, we need them to like assist in trying to teach it to learn.
Hmm.
So we would hope that I think the hello world at this point for humanoids is making coffee. I think that's a great baseline. I think that's just like a fun thing. So it'll be able to make coffee. Will it drop the cup a couple times? Yeah. But that's also kind of our advantage, where we as a company being open source, we're willing to release our stuff early and people will know that, it's not going to be perfect. But this is the whole idea of AI, which is it shouldn't be perfect because you don't have the data, and that you need to collect the data in order to make it perfect. So it's this kind of like who's going to adopt it first, and hopefully it's like early enthusiasts and makers who understand that nothing is perfect. And then as they kind of assist, as we all work together towards this, we eventually then can get to a level where we can hit the next stage, which is, being able to deploy it in regular people's houses that do expect it to work 100% of the time. But I think still we're a little bit, I think as humanoids is, a little ways out.
There's so many aspects here. I don't want to go into to all of them. Just a few maybe. There's the because so I'm working in companies that are shipping products, right? So we do have customers in this
Right.
company, in the other company I was working before, and there's a lot of education and there's a lot of so-called change management need to be done at the customer side, right? There's robotics and there's especially the buzzword of AI, and people have this magic idea or this idea that this is magic, like it's a magic black box and it solves every problem. It does anything on their own, which is not the case. It does a few things, and a few of those things need, as you said, more training, more. They are more complex, and I think here it's another gap that needs to be closed. What do you show on demos, and what is actually working, and I think, and this is valid for a lot of these kind of companies, right? And I think because a lot of these companies are based on or coming originally from academia, where you have these iterations and you do know that you know nothing, right? As deeper as you go, you only understand that there's so many more things that needed to be taken care of, and that you don't understand that you didn't know before, right? And whereas when you buy a product, you expect you this is a stage where I can buy a product, so that means it should be ready, right? Because when I buy a shoe, I don't assume that the shoe needs to be assembled by me, and right, and that I do need to glue it together so it fits my foot, right? And here, I think there's iteration that are necessary to come out with a good working product. And as most of these companies or a lot of these companies are VC funded, right? So this is where the storytelling is, this is where engineering is, right? And we are selling them, and we do need to close that gap. So it will be very interesting to see that as you're building open source, or as you're building in public, you do have a community that might be the early adopters. And here I'm very interested to see if these mind barriers that exist in my customers, right? Um, I'm expecting 100% fully working product, right? Not all the customers. With some customers, we are on a deeper level and that have this kind of understanding of innovation that are helping us to reach those new levels. I'm really keen to see how this will work out for you guys, as you are actually depending on your customers to help you to bring the product to a stage where it's actually useful, right? I'm very, very excited for you guys and for us as end consumers and end customers as well, because it would be nice. Yeah, one of the things that I was asking, do you have a price point already in mind?
Yeah, I mean, so the bill of materials we're hoping is sub 10K. And we're
Mm,
working and honestly, the main cost is just the actuators themselves. That's really the
mm,
main cost. I mean, the 3D printing material is relatively cheap. Um, it's we were getting hit with, I think one of the issues we're getting hit with is some political issues, right? Where we're getting hit with tariffs on our actuators. We actually have to pay 25% tariff tax on things in the US. So it's like cheaper elsewhere. This kind of sub 10K category it makes it somewhat available to the general public. I would say like 10K is a lot of money, but 10K for a humanoid that, let's say, does your dishes and your laundry, maybe there's some leasing structure or something like that for some other company to set up. But it doesn't really put it out of the range of, let's say, somebody who would buy a Vision Pro. I
mm,
mean, at this point, it looks like it's just a race to the bottom in terms of hardware, right? I think like we see this where and we always bring up this scale where it's like if you can produce the actuators, the motors at scale, the price of like torque per dollar, or is dollar per torque, I think is it goes down. So one of the interesting things we always point at is that torque per dollar is very linear. As you increase, one torque unit, like you increase like $1, whatever. Um, and that's true, except for one single motor. And that motor is the same torque values as a motor that typically costs $650, but that motor is $50. And you're like, that's crazy. Why, how is that possible? And it's the motors that they find in the hoverboards, like those little toy hoverboards, like the two-wheel
Mhm.
hoverboards that kids ride around, because they just produce them at such massive scale. And it's like right now, the cost of the humanoid is, thousands of dollars, and the actuators basically take up 80, 85% of the costs. There's
That's
no
crazy.
reason. It's nuts. Absolutely nuts. There's no reason why, if you were just able to produce motors at scale, which we're seeing a large influx of robotics companies start, and everybody's now buying motors, it's like there's no reason why you shouldn't expect the humanoids to be able to drop in price. There's no reason why
Mhm.
the motors we're buying right now shouldn't be, halved in price in a couple years, if not even more. Um, and so and this is also why like hardware is very hard, because the reality is that like it is really just a race to the bottom. We're going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper as things scale up.
Yeah, I mean, it has always been and it always will be. So let's see who will not win the race, but let's see how, because competition is good for the game, right? It pushes you. And I remember that Brad was, um, I think he was very cocky about some of the design topics or influences that they gave to other companies. And I think you guys mocked it a little bit. I can't remember 100% what it was, but it was. I remember that some people jumped on that train, and to think about the very basic movements that you almost have no other way of doing it. Like, for example, so my arm can only bend in this direction, right? So you can't see another human with another elbow. It will always be this kind of elbow because this is the way it works, right? So it was funny that I think this is part of his game of yeah, telling his story and how unique they are and how advanced they are. But yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it was the kind of the actuation in the spine, the stomach
Mm.
spine area. Um, it's like, okay, anybody who's worked in like automotive or aerospace was like, okay, simple kind of linkage design. It is what it is. You can't really patent that, or whatever the patent was, doesn't really matter. Um, yeah, a lot of the mechanical designs, and honestly, like we view this too, where a lot of the mechanical designs, the hard part has already been somewhat solved. Like um, linkages, like we understand linkages very well, right? Like you can now put linkages wherever you want. It works. Fine, great. Like belts too. Um, it's just like, do we know the optimal places to put them yet? Not really, not yet.
Mm. Mm.
But yeah, and so it's always kind of funny when people kind of claim that like the hardware is somewhat unique. It's very tough to make unique hardware. I think that's
Yeah.
always the tough thing, right? It's very tough, especially if you're like a hardware only business. It's very tough to create something new, and it takes a lot of money to do. That's a lot of
And
time, a lot of development.
yeah, I mean, the question is, why are today cars all look the same? It's because it's at a certain point you're trying to get closer to the optimum, and when you go closer to the optimum, there's not too many differences when it comes to the optimum, right? So physical features or physical principles will teach you physical principles that are universal will limit the things that you are able to do, right? So the majority of cars look the same because in the tunnel, so the aerodynamic wise, this is the most efficient one, right? So 40, 50, 60 years ago, people had, or cars were much bigger, so the way of the designs
Stylish.
were,
Yeah.
yes, but then it cuts down to the efficiency, and here we do see everything will come to a point where they need to look the same if you would like to make money out of it. So
Yeah. And
um,
I mean, talking on cars, right? I mean, companies share their designs with each other all the time, right? To
Mm,
lower their development costs. And
mm,
right, so just like we said, where um, smart TVs, where one company will make the consumer electronic part and one company will make the software. Um, I mean, even with cars, right? So not even talking about the software, like even in terms of the hardware, right? Companies work together. We have Toyota with the whole, you probably know the whole Supra issue, which was like, is it a
mm,
BMW? Is it a Toyota? Nobody knows. But Toyota's
mm,
really good at tuning engines. And,
mm.
BMW has a pretty good chassis. So we're going to see, right now, we don't see it in a way where there's going to be a lot of collaboration between robotics companies. I mean, on the lower level, in the startup world, there's a lot of collaboration. We're very friendly with a lot of the other roboticists, and we bring them over all the time and we share ideas and like we share different things. But I think that in the future, we're going to see a lot of these higher level collaborations. There will be a couple companies that have the whole, vertical stack, but I think it's just going to be a lot cheaper to,
Mm.
do these partnerships.
This is, as we're coming to an end, this is something that I'm always trying to use as a cliffhanger because a lot of these
Hmm.
people that I'm talking to are in the very early stages of their work. So it is interesting for me to see where you guys will be in 6 months, in 8 months, in 10 months, and I I hope that you guys will be able to succeed. I mean, I wish this to everyone, right? There's no, I wish this guy will not succeed. It's just, I hope this spirit, as you say, this sharing among and trying to come up with ideas, because in the very end, the market is big enough. But keeping this commercial aspect and competition out of it versus let's have competition to get better, right? And as long as the humanoid, because in the very end I'm much interested in humanoids that are not only in the hands of companies. It would be nice, even though this here maybe I might be a little bit delusional, but why should it be with humanoids different than with other products that we have out there, right? But it would be nice if we are not facing against humanoids that only belong to a very few companies that are able to build them versus maybe we have humanoids that a lot of people are working on and there are a lot of different initiatives. So in the case of the AI will take over, we have some friends on our side that are humanoids as well.
Yeah, I think that the market is absolutely massive. I don't think that there's gonna be so many players, which is exciting because that means that there are so many different ideas.
Hmm.
Um, this goes back to kind of why our company got started in the first place too, which was like the thing Ben also told me. He was like, I'm worried that humanoids aren't going to be a thing because everybody's making them so expensive and they're only going to become warehousing robots.
Hmm.
And I was like, that's a horrible future. We should not let that happen. Uh, and so yeah, this is really the whole thing, which is people should have humanoids. They should have the ability to learn how to build humanoids, and we should have way more humanoid companies than we do now. I think that the more humanoid companies that get started, the more ideas we have, the more likely we are to have humanoids in the future. And if we can have, a billion humanoids from a million different companies, I think in terms of like our company, I think we've succeeded.
Hmm. We haven't touched the aspect of security and safety today, and we will not open up this box of Pandora.
We
It
talk for
is
hours.
No, I'm very thankful that you took the time to have this talk with me. I would love to. Yeah, we spoke a little bit about the earlier. So if you ever been in Germany again, if you ever be here and will be in the around, it doesn't matter if it's Berlin or Stuttgart, where I'm now nearby. Please say hi and let's have an ongoing conversation because I'm very curious what you guys are building.
Of course, amazing. Yeah, if you're ever in the Bay, you're always welcome. I will say as well, like I mentioned, we're on every morning at 8:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time in terms of our daily stand-ups. We also publicly present all of our work in our Discord every Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then that stuff always gets posted then to Twitter. So you and anybody else that wants to come, more than welcome to. We always have discussions. We always have community input. We're on call, so we can always have, more personal stuff. So it's great. But I appreciate this.
Awesome.
This was great.
Thank you very much. Yeah, especially for the last tip, because I was aware that you guys were sharing, but I was not aware that you guys are sharing like this sharing, this kind of sharing, and especially with the Discord and so regularly. I think this is very interesting, and I will have a look at it.
Yeah, no, I think I like our Fridays one the best because it's a recap of the entire week and everybody gives a presentation as to kind of what they worked on. Our weekly updates on Twitter, those get talked about live with our community and our community asks questions during it.
Mm.
It's very fun.
I will try to join it, even though we do have a huge time difference.
Little
But
time difference, yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
Thanks, Matt. Say hi to Benjamin, and looking forward to talk to you again.
Of course, yes. Looking forward to the next one. Have a good one.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.